This episode is sponsored by the Soul of Business Experience, a leadership community with curated resources for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their careers. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett, and I've been working in leadership and leadership development for well over 40 years now. That's kind of why my hair's the color it is. And I've seen a lot of things. I've bumped into a lot of stuff. And the most effective leaders I've ever encountered are the ones that are in some way, shape, or form connected to what I've now come to call a for the sake of what. Simon Sinek might talk about the why, but it's really kind of the purpose of why I'm doing what I'm doing. For the sake of what does this make sense? For the sake of what are we moving in that direction? For the sake of what do we exist? Those sorts of questions, and those leaders that wrestle with those living questions, because there's not a static there. It seems to evolve as the organization grows, as I grow. We're all a work in progress. And literally, I'm going to take that phrase. We're all a work in progress, because that is something that my guest today, Andre Thornton, actually said in an introductory video when he was describing what his company, Whitman Consulting, is about. Whitman Consulting is a leadership development organization, and one of the premier ones in the country today. Andre Thornton, again, founder and CEO of Whitman Consulting, started out as an engineer and did his time at Lockheed Martin, and it was quite successful, and booked over $1 billion in business at one point in time when he was, moving through that whole process, and jumped out and started looking at how do we actually develop leaders. And in the course of his journey, he's discovered some very interesting things. He's got a book I want to be sure that we talk about called Disrupted. And without going into the details on the subtitle on it, basically where he's coming from is that there is only growth through chaos. And I'm going to just kind of summarize it in that sense. The only way we grow is when we're willing to embrace chaos, when we're the disruption. And that's the title of the book, Disrupted. So we're going to explore that, kind of how do we actually navigate the unpredictable nature of the world in which we live, whether it's a business, whether it's a family, whether it's society, all of that kind of stuff. So, Andre, welcome to the show.
Blaine, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so excited to be here. I love the show, and it's truly an honor to have a chance to engage with you and with your guest today.
Well, it's the honor is mine as well. I love what you're up to. I love what Whitman is up to. And just curious, the title of the program, the podcast, is The Soul of Business. When you hear the term, and we were talking a little bit in the quote unquote green room before we went live here, when you hear the term the soul of business, what does that bring up for you, both as a professional, but also as just a human being?
What comes to mind, and which is why I love this title, is it's the people, it's the human element of business, which, some could say is an oxymoron. It's kind of like don't take this personal, this is business saying.
Yeah, boy.
When everything about what we do as people is personal, including business. So I feel like what you've done is you stripped away this sort of outer shell of what business has come to be believed to be, something other than people, in getting down to just the soul of it, which everyone talks about. People are the most important thing, but I love how you strip everything away and you truly say, no, we're going to talk about the people part of business. And that is the thing that is, you say, is the prompt, which is incredible.
And I'm fond of saying this because I think it's true, which is why it is an observation. But at the end of the day, and I will ask this in training programs or, just in one-on-one coaching with my clients, when you look at your organization, what do you see? What is an organization? What is a business? And people will bounce around and they'll give me all kinds of different answers. At the end of the day, though, what we end up talking about is what it actually is. It's a collection of people that are in relationship. That's essentially all any organization is, as far as I can tell. And if the relationships are working well, you got a pretty good chance of being successful. If the relationships start to bend or break, then you've got something that is distracting, and you're not going to have focus in the way that you need to have it in order to produce what it is you say you want to do. And the most obvious, relational dynamics are the interpersonal ones. The one that I have with my coworkers, my boss, my peers, that sort of thing. But I also have relationship with my chair, my work process. All of those things have relational dynamics. And I think the most critical one is my relationship with myself. The one that I have with myself. Who am I? Where do I belong? I mean, those are relational questions, and I bring them to work with me every day. So with that, soapbox little kind of positioning here, in the work that you do, not only with the clients with whom you work personally, but also with Whitman, kind of how you position your work with Whitman. How do you address that relationship issue? I guess would be kind of the net of the question that I'm after here. How do you, first of all, am I off base with that from your perspective? And if I'm not, how do you address it?
I think you're spot on. And the piece that you said that really grabbed me is it starts with self. I work with teams, and when you work with a team, a lot of times you're brought in because there's some kind of conflict with the team.
Yeah.
And
We've got
what's really
communication problems,
right, communication problems, we've got
accountability issues.
accountability, all the things. And it comes down to, and this is when, I shifted and named the book Disrupted, and everything has been about the individual, is I realized, so we're all walking around basically as these ticking time bombs because we haven't dealt with self yet. And I am the first to say I did not want to deal with self. When I learned Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence and the four quadrants, the self-awareness, self-management, and others awareness, relationship building, I jumped straight to the other stuff, skipped the self-awareness, self-management. Dealing with my own stuff was not what I wanted to do. And I skipped it for many years. And it wasn't until I realized that the true catalyst for creating what I wanted, which was great engagement with other people, was to first understand me and help me lead myself first. And it's hard. People don't talk about this, but it's these soft skills, right? They're the hardest. It's funny that we even call them soft skills, especially the self reflection and the self growth. But it all comes down to that to then unlock as everyone gets more aware of what's going on within themselves, and they can interact better. And I find that time and time again, we all just want to be heard and understood. And it's hard to do that when everyone's, kind of dealing with their own disrupted state.
I mean, I love that answer. Two things we're going to work with here, just real quick, with your permission. First of all, just kind of your journey, kind of how you got from being an engineer at Lockheed Martin to where you're at right now, running and founding this consultancy that actually does this kind of work. And then the second piece would be kind of where did the disrupted piece come into play here? The book came out March 31st, so it's a new book. And you've got, two stabilizers that you talk about and seven accelerators that you reference. So I'm assuming that there is some connection between your developmental path and the book itself.
Yeah, and there absolutely is. Disruption is a consistent theme in my journey that until I really reflected on it, I didn't realize that it was the catalyst, it was the gift that allowed the journey to happen. So I talk about disruption not being an obstacle, it actually being the road. And so, I had a very traditional career, Blaine. I mean, I grew up, got a degree in engineering, got a dream job at an incredible company doing very fascinating work using my degree, moved up the chain, and then had a career disruption that left me literally on the floor in my basement crying and not knowing who I was.
Yeah.
And that disruption was my role was taken away just based on not anything personal, of course, back to personal versus business.
Yeah. It's not personal, it's your business.
It's just business, but it affected me in such a personal way. And it caused me to start this process of introspection because the thing that I was chasing all that time that I had captured was taken away and it was not in my control. And so that ended up becoming the catalyst for me shifting my career and my life to focus on developing other people. And the first person that needed to be developed was me. So the book is actually based on the stabilizers and accelerators that I used to sort of pick myself up and build myself back from that moment.
So as long as we have moved into stabilizers and accelerators here, what are they and how do they actually come into play?
Yeah, it's interesting how this works. So the first two stabilizers, they're grouped in the section is called Find Your Footing. So if something happens, there's really a decision we have to make. It doesn't feel like we have a decision because, like job loss, I experienced the role was taken away. I was a director and very proud to be, and the role was taken away after a reorganization. We have a decision to make in that moment. And, what feels natural, and this is the theme throughout the book, what feels natural to do in a disrupted moment is actually usually the opposite of what we should do. So, in a moment of a role being taken away, what felt natural was to try to quickly replace the role. There's a lot of shame and, there's a lot of really bad feeling that goes with that. So the natural reaction is to try to just quickly, okay, let me get another director job doing something similar. And I decided though that instead, and this is what's in the first two stabilizers, I'm going to find my footing. I'm going to figure out, okay, this thing changed. Instead of reacting, I'm going to recalibrate. And that's what that first section is all about. And so there's a 1440 method that's a stabilizer, and then there's a cognitive calibration. Without going into further detail, I'll just kind of give you a big picture. So imagine now you have your footing, you have a direction in life, and you have a way to sort of recalibrate when things go wrong. Then the next thing was, all right, now what am I going to do? And this is where it got really interesting because I had all my life, I've been thinking about these jobs, these roles, these positions I wanted. And what shifted was I no longer wanted a role. I wanted a reason. And the reason is the why. And the reason is it doesn't matter what the position is. It doesn't even matter if I'm at work or I'm at home or I'm in the community or I'm hanging out with my friends. What is my reason? What is my why? And I found that there is one for me. And I believe there's one for all of us, but a lot of times we just don't have a chance to find it. So think of, this second section is like you move with purpose. And then the third and final section is lifting others as you rise. And, this is an interesting leadership principle of instead of trying to control people, we should be trying to connect with them. And there's a four steps accelerators within that section on how to do that. So think of it as things go wrong. Instead of just reacting, you recalibrate to find your footing and figure out the direction you want to head. And then once you have that direction, you move with purpose. And as you move with purpose, you connect with and lead others along the way that want to be a part of, where you're heading. And I found that it's a repeatable process. What gets in the way are our feelings about what's happening. And so based on the neuroscience, there's a way to overcome those feelings that are driving maybe the behaviors that won't give us the outcome that we want. And that's what's built over and over again into the book's fabric.
What I like about the way you describe this, Andre, is the elegance of the model. I mean, elegance, and people that have listened to the show have heard me talk about this a little bit. I use elegance from a software coding perspective, not a sartorial, you look good sort of a thing. Elegant code is code that has minimal to no unintended consequences. Yeah, so it's bug free. So from a leadership perspective, if I'm leading with elegance, I've got minimal cleanup that I need to do as a consequence of what I just did. And where I'm going with this has to do with that first piece, that those two stabilizers. I lost the role. I lost the position in those two questions that I referenced earlier. Who am I? Where do I belong? When those are violated or called into question, the physiological experience is one of being knocked off balance. I'm boom. Yeah, I've just been disrupted. And you mentioned that, what seems to be the natural thing to do is probably not the thing I need to do because it's a reactive response, literally a reactive response, not a thoughtful response at all. So I'm going to go get another role, that sort of thing, which doesn't give room for resourcefulness. And I was really struck by the way that you actually positioned that. Yeah, I studied Aikido for a bunch of years when I lived in Japan, and then, when I was back here. I love telling this story because I think it's real illustrative of what you're speaking about here. Um, I was watching my sensei, yeah, my teacher. At the time, he was about 72 years old, I think, something like that. He stood about 5'2", um, and moved like, I'm going to date myself with this, but he moved like Baryshnikov or Nureyev, from a ballet perspective. In the martial arts, there's something that's called a randori. And if you've ever seen a Jackie Chan movie or a Bruce Lee movie, you've got all of the uh, antagonists, kind of circling around the person in the center, and they come at him all at the same time. That's a randori, and it's basically a test to move you to that next level, to move up a dan in your belt. Oh, watching my master in a demonstrator randori, and I happened to witness a black belt promotion. This guy was, I mean, I was, my mind was blown. He had all of these people coming at him, and he was just nonchalantly moving, and these guys were flying all over the place. Afterwards, I said to him, Sensei, how do you remain centered all of the time? This was just incredible demonstration. And he looked at me and he said, and I'll never forget this, I'm not centered all the time. I'm off balance almost all of the time, but I know where my center is. And I can come back to it quickly because it's only in my center that I have resourcefulness. If I'm off balance, I'm going to be overcompensating all the time. And I'm going, you kind of like mind blown sort of a thing. So what you're speaking about is exactly that. And I wrote this down, not a role. What's my reason? Not a role. What's my reason? That's the anchor. I know where my center is. I can come back to it.
Mm.
How has that served you professionally as you have moved into a new role as a CEO founder of this consultancy, which is very different? I mean, it's a whole different domain than being an engineer at Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, it is. And, I love what you just said about this, the finding the center, which is beautiful. But the other part of it was he's always off balance, which is the discomfort of being disrupted or, growth. But he knows where the center is. So there's like the confidence of knowing where the center is and that you can get back to it is the impetus of this concept of being able to move successfully through disruption. Just because disruption happened doesn't mean we're going to move through it successfully. But how I would describe how it's shown up, and it's been 10 years, we celebrated Whitman Consulting April 1st, which is such a gift.
Congratulations.
And I would not have ever guessed I would be doing this work, to be completely honest. It's just the way things have evolved. And, I'm a Christian, very faith-based, a lot of prayer in this journey. But there's things that happen that we can't explain, that when you do connect to that center, they will start to happen.
Yeah.
So I've got story after story about things that happened where I just put the word out about something that I was doing, or reached out to someone or they reached out to me, that I can't say logically how it happened, but they turned into contracts. They turned into new relationships and partnerships. And I wholeheartedly believe that that's the intangible, the inexplainable, the human, the soul of how things actually operate, that you can't necessarily, quantify or capture and grasp. So what's been different for me in this space has been serendipity. Just seems to have a way of always going favorably. Where before, I was in a very, very rigid, process oriented, very left brained environment, which, we literally were building jets, and it takes an incredible amount of analytical processing to do that. And this new space has been one of complete expansion that I can't explain, other than it's because I'm connected to the my own soul, my own center. And when people see that, they can feel it, and it inspires them to want to be a part of it.
I love that. There's an energetic quality to that. Wallace Wattles, in The Science of Getting Rich, when he wrote that back at the turn of the last century, talked about essentially, and this wasn't his words exactly, but he was talking about connecting to that source. And when you're connected, you begin taking, what he called right action. And it is action that's in concert with that font. And in that process, because it's an energetic dynamic, there's an attractor that comes into play here. And I say attractor in a metaphysical sense here. All of a sudden, I've got things that are showing up in my environment that I couldn't have created. I couldn't have made that happen. And you used the word serendipity. That's the experience of it, but it's like it's connected to that source, and it's connected to what we end up calling now manifestation. We're manifesting a certain way of being, as a consequence, a certain way of producing. And that, I think, is what leadership is about, is creating the opportunity for people to recognize possibilities that are unseen in a way that they can begin to resonate with them. And in that resonance, begin to produce stuff that they never thought that they could do. They only imagined it as a possibility. So the possibility to probability into reality dynamic.
Right, right. Growing up as a technical professional, and also I went to a military college,
Which one?
Virginia Military Institute.
Yeah, okay.
Very challenging environment.
Yes.
I later learned that we call it the adversarial system, where I mean every day is just you're just pushing, and so you get through that, and then you come out and you feel like you can do anything. You can conquer the world because you've been through this experience. So we come out, we hit the ground running. So I have this sort of life, and I was raised by a single father, very kind of hard nosed, hard work, a lot of grit, sort of grind culture was the first half of my life. And then I started getting introduced to manifestation. I started getting introduced to the books and ideas on, like ask and it is given. And so there's this other side that I didn't really take seriously because I always thought, that was just la la land and we need the hard facts and data to get things done. And what I found, and this is really what's at the center of the work that we do, is it's both. It's you have to be willing to do the work, but it matters how you feel while you're doing it.
Yeah.
And that idea that you don't have to give up the desire to sort of feel elevated as you're doing a thing in order to accomplish something really hard. As a matter of fact, it is the frequency that will allow you to do it. But at the same time, you have to be willing to do the work. Those two ideas combined have been probably the most powerful kind of, atom making thing for me. And it's shown up time and time again. And the more I try to disprove it, the more it proves itself. So it's one of those, this is what I say about leadership. I say leadership is like gravity. You don't have to believe in it for it to pull you down.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with these elements. If you can choose not to believe in law of attraction, but it doesn't mean that the laws don't exist.
Exactly.
And at the same time, you can choose not to, put in the work and think you can just only, I believe it's possible, but most of us just here on this earth in this environment haven't been able to do it. Just only do the thinking and feeling and things will happen. You think you don't have to do the work,
You got to do the
but
do.
you've got to do the do. And finding the marriage of the two has just been the biggest gift for me. And, now I get to share that with other people.
You use the word frequency, and everything that I do any longer is organized around frequency. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm working on a doctorate right now. Yeah, the metaphysical grounding of ethics in business. And metaphysics, interestingly enough, is the oldest branch of philosophy. It goes back about when you really start, lifting the rock up and seeing what was in there. But the idea of metaphysics is the structure of reality. That's essentially what it means. And 5,000 years ago, they didn't use this language specifically, but it was frequency. It was vibrational recognition. Everything vibrates. My coffee cup is vibrating. but it's vibrating at such a rate that it appears solid to me. I mean, and this is the science. So there's an interesting confluence, I think, that's occurring today where there is an actual recognition that the perennial philosophy, the Bhagavad Gita, the Bible, I mean, you take these works and they go, they were onto something. Yeah. They were onto something. And now we're actually, seeing some scientific evidence that suggests, yeah, they were onto something. And manifestation, everything is already existing. It just hasn't been manifested. And so my job as a leader is to manifest a possibility that already exists. Yeah. So how do I do that? Well, Steve Jobs talked about or people talked about the reality distortion field that Jobs actually was famous for in some interesting ways. But that was a frequency. Yeah. He worked on frequency. You got in his frequency and you started to believe that impossible was now possible. And as soon as he made you believe it, or invited you into that where you believed it, then it happened. That, I think, is, for me, a way that leaders work. We set the ceiling on what our people do as leaders. People will give me what they perceive I'm willing to settle for. They
Mm,
never give me what I ask for. I can ask for the moon, but if they experience me settling for, a lump of coal, they're going to give me lumps of coal. So
mm,
to going full circle here, I have to work on myself first. Work on me. I raise myself. I raise my people. And then I build great companies by building great people. I mean, I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. And that starts with the leader building themselves. Now, that's my soapbox spiel. And I want to just kind of close our conversation here with your observations about how that works. This whole idea of manifestation, about leaders setting ceilings, that sort of a thing. Where does that come into play for you?
So, this idea of finding footing, it is a combination of like the self-awareness of some of our values and, things that make us who we are. But it's also taking the lid off of what we can create. James Clear, who I love, he has some fascinating work.
Yeah, James. Yeah.
And he talks about these three dimensions of behavior change. And you've got the goal that you set, and then you've got the process that you have to get to the goal. But the third element is the identity. And so this idea that we have an identity and we are who we are, and like we move through grade school, we're a first grader, second grader, third grader, and then we graduate into the world, and then we're on this railroad of moving up the ladder in a company, or whatever the thing that exists. That's there for a reason, and there is something powerful about the concept of title because identity comes with it. But what I have found is, if we're going to take the lid off as a human being, then in the book at the very beginning, I invite them to take that lid off. So maybe if things have just shifted in your world, and it doesn't have to be a job that's taken away. It could be a marriage.
Hmm.
It could be something happens to a loved one, and you're not really sure how life will go on without them. There's all kinds of ways that we're disrupted, but the idea is when it happens, it gives us an opportunity to, when we're in this space and we're down, to reimagine what up may look like.
Yeah.
And when you're on your way up and you're in the middle of it, it's kind of hard to pause and do that. And
Hmm.
that's the beauty of disruption. It forces you to.
Yeah.
And once you do, and you really allow yourself to embody something new that maybe you hadn't imagined before about who you are and what you can do, then that's when, life just continues to evolve. And what I love about it is you do that once and then, think you're done. And
Yeah.
you're never done. You're never done.
Never done. We're all a work in progress.
All a work in progress forevermore. And that's the beauty of it. And
Yeah.
then you just come back to that center. Just like you said, you just come back to that center. Once you know that center, you're golden because you have something to come back to.
Spot on. Folks, Andre Thornton has been my guest today. This has been I've loved this conversation. I could continue this for some time, but I'm not going to. I would love to have you back on another show at some point in time. As a matter of fact, we've got a couple of other shows that we do with one of my partners, David Meltzer. We could get you on one of our office hours shows, talk about the book a little bit. So if you're interested, I'll make that happen.
Yep, would love to do that. Would love
Okay,
to.
we'll make that happen. So, Andre, thank you so much for being such an incredible guest. I've really loved this conversation and where you're coming from. Folks, the book, hold that up. Here we go. We got a jacket. I love this cover. Disrupted, the 2 stabilizers and 7 accelerators of growth through chaos. You can get it at all the regular places, so be sure you pick up a copy. Okay. And until next time, this is Blaine Bartlett. You've been listening to Blaine Bartlett, Andre Thornton on the Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. As always, I'm going to close off with this admonition, an invitation. Everything in nature works as a center of, in some way, shape, or form, a center of distribution. There is nothing in nature that serves solely as a center of accumulation. Everything is always dispersing itself at some point in time, in some way, shape, and form. So act as if you're a part of nature, because you are. Be a center of distribution in your life. Give things away. Find a way to give a smile, a hug, donate, tip the bill. Do something that makes somebody else smile. And you're going to see your life works a whole lot better. And until next time, take care and thanks for listening. This episode is sponsored by the Soul of Business Experience, a leadership community with curated resources for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their careers. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.